Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're back in War Thunder in update 1.77, and we're having a look at one of the other new Spitfires. This is the Spitfire Mark V-C. Where you'll find it in the tech tree is in this group here. It is the last of the 4 Mark Vs that you will find in the game, at least the Spitfire variants. Just as a little thing going forward, what I've actually done is in the description of every video now going forward, there will be a link to a download file, which is my config for the controls. A few people yesterday on the stream asked me for it, so what I've done is here, I've created a download link for you through Google Drive, so you are able to download my config if you want to use it. And that's pretty much my control setup. But let's get into the Spitfire Mark V-C. So with the update to the Mark Vs, we have extra armor. Once again, we have some steel in the wings, steel in the front plate, only 1mm though, bulletproof glass, which is 38mm, and then of course the 7 and 4 at the back. Obviously this increases your survivability a little bit, but overall doesn't really do that much, especially against a lot of the aircraft you are facing. It'll help you against HE shells, but most people are not throwing them out nowadays. The biggest difference between the 5B, which we covered before, and the 5C is the fact that you have extra 20mm on the 5C. So you have 4 20mm Hispanos in the form of these two guys, and these two guys on the wings instead of the 7.7s on the outer bit of the wing. You also have an oil cooling system and a liquid cooling system here in the wings, and you have a 45M 12-cylinder inline with a hell of a lot of power behind it, and also the same fuel tank setup with a not self-sealing one on the top, and then a self-sealing one on the bottom. If we look at the modifications, the general way I always approach a Spitfire is, first of all, get the flight performance stuff, but before that, you have to get all of the rank 1 stuff unless it is secondary armament. So in this case, fuselage, repair, radiator, and then offensive 20mm, and then from there, be able to get all of the flight performance stuff, then the survivability, then the cannons upgrade. The reason for this is because I short burst with the cannons. I don't try and prolong the fire, so even though without these upgrades installed, the cannons are quite sprayy, like they're pretty much like shotguns, and also they fail very quickly. Because I burst fire in very small bursts, that doesn't generally affect me or my playstyle. So it's much better for me to go for these flight performance ones. But if you're a person who likes to elongate their fire, maybe try and throw as much ammo they can at a player trying to kill them, then, you know, you should go after the weaponry stuff to make sure you're as accurate as possible. But I would recommend the flight performance ones, just so you are able to get yourself in a position to attack an enemy, instead of have the guns to do it as well. The default rounds on the Spitfire Mark V-C are not very good. So we have heavy PT. PT shells are generally useless for this, and the heavy, if they penetrate, will do a lot of damage. So that is why we run stealth now. So heavy, have sappy, AP. The air target belts, I personally haven't had any fun with. Like, they haven't been very useful because I'm not penetrating anything. And at least with the stealth rounds, if I face a bomber with a decent amount of armor, I still have that option of the AP shell with it. So that's why I've been running stealth recently instead of air targets, where Hef Sappy just isn't working right now, which is very sad. The Hispanos have definitely hit a nerf, well, they've been hit by a nerf pad over the years, and even with 4 of them, it can still be a bit of a struggle to take down a bomber. But with 480 rounds of ammunition, this is easily enough to take out 3 or 4 fighters, as long as you are accurate with the guns, and with this type of Spitfire, it is very easy to be accurate, so therefore gun convergence is something you have to think about. Generally, in this type of Spitfire, and what I mean by this is a Merlin Spitfire, what I like to do is to get very close to the enemies and then rat-a-tat them and, you know, be able to annihilate them. But in order to do this, you have to be able to get the flight performance upgrades and then get close to them and then annihilate them with the guns. So once you get into that position of being able to annihilate them, you have to make sure your gun convergence is good and make sure that your guns are always on target. Otherwise, you will waste rounds and you don't have a ton of them. Even though 480 might seem like a lot, that is 120 per gun, and with Hispanos that will disappear quite quickly. Not as quick as some Russian aircraft with their Shevaks, but still pretty quick. It also sits at a battle rating of 4.7, which is a bit of a dodgy BR. The main reason for this is you can get up tiered into 5.7 Germans quite a lot, and there are quite a few 5.3s which are pretty good as well, including the K4, the G10, G14, A-0, which is making a comeback, and also the new Grief, which a lot of people are playing. So a 4.7 is quite high for this machine. It is kind of surprising it is higher than the Mark 9, but it depends on if you think the guns are worth it, or if you feel like the flight performance is worth it. For me personally, I think the flight performance is much more worth it in the Mark 9 than it is in the Mark 5 compared to the guns. But then again, that is a personal choice. If I was going to critique this thing, I would say it needs to be put 0.3 BR lower to be equal to the Mark 9. So with the Mark 9 you get the speed and maneuverability, with the Mark 5 you get the firepower, so it's an easy choice. Right now it is an easy choice, you take the Mark 9 every time, or the F Mark 9 in my opinion. But it depends if you like these guns or not, because obviously with the F Mark 9 you get less Hispanos and more 7.7s. The Mark 5 also has Mark 2, so these are not Mark 5 Hispanos yet. This is a 1942/43 aircraft. If you want to know the history of the Mark 5C, go and watch the Mark 5B video that I did. I do cover it there. It's a very similar story to the Mark 5s in general. There's nothing really different about it apart from the different offensive armaments. And in game, it does have a quicker speed than the Mark 5B. But anyway, let's get into some gameplay. When looking at the Spitfire Mark 5C, something that I think about a lot is there are certain planes, especially in the British tree, but in all of the trees, where you can see their potential, you can understand how they're supposed to work. They have okay speed, they have okay turn, they have great guns, and you can pretty much get a picture in your head how it should fly and what its strength should be. But the issue is, I always compare it to other Spitfires. Mainly because it's a 4.7, the F Mark 9. The F Mark 9 is a faster, more maneuverable aircraft, and actually flies like a Spitfire, where the Mark 5C flies very much like a heavy Spitfire, and that's because of the extra Hispanos that sit in the wing. Now you may be thinking, well, the Mark 22, the Mark 24, these are Spitfires which have 420mm Hispanos, but they act as great energy fighters. They have a lot of power behind them. Well, that's the issue with something like a Mark 5C. It doesn't have that same power. It has the Merlin engine, which has a decent amount of power behind it, but it isn't enough to be able to compensate for the extra weight that you have added to the aircraft. One of the things I realized while I was grinding through it the other day, while I was on stream, is the modifications in general are quite expensive because of the battle rating of 4.7 that it finds itself at. And in general, if you don't have the top tier modifications such as the engine and the engine injection and all of that stuff, it doesn't feel fun to fly. It feels like a slow Spitfire. It feels like a sluggish Spitfire. And one thing that the Spitfire should not be is sluggish. It should not be in this area where you cannot outturn a bunch of aircraft. What happens with the Mark 5C is you start getting outturned by stuff like G6s, by a lot of the Russian aircraft, by a lot of the German aircraft. So therefore setup is incredibly important, and if you're able to get that setup on the enemy team, then you're going to do really well. If you put yourself in that aggressive position where you are the one attacking, you're going to nail people every time, because you have the maneuverability to keep on them. The issue is you don't have the maneuverability to get away from them. which is the key thing when it comes to a Spitfire. A Spitfire in general is very good at defensively flying. The Mark 5C is not. Just like the tropical versions, which are heavier, it is not that good at being able to get away. And that is a real issue with the Mark 5C, because it means that the deficiencies that the Spitfires generally find cannot be counteracted. One of the biggest deficiencies of the lower tier Merlin Spitfires is the fact that they don't do well at high altitudes, and also they don't dive as well as other aircraft. So in order to be able to counter these, what you need to do is be able to defensively fly. The Mark 5C is not able to do this because of the extra weight. It gets outturned by, as I said, some of the premium aircraft that people play at this tier. And I don't mean premium as in premium in the game, but the main ones that people use. Also, being at that BASA rating of 4.7, a lot of the time you end up at either 4.3 or 5.3. And at 5.3 you are completely outclassed by what you face, and at 4.3 you're pretty much on even ground. If I take a G2 Trop, I feel like a G2 Trop is a great matchup against the Mark 5C. If the Trop doesn't take its cannons, then the Mark 5C will get outturned by it. If it does take its cannons, the Mark 5C will outturn it. The G2 Trop has better, well, it has worse energy retention, I should say, and also at the same time, it has the better dive speed. So overall, you can see that each side has its own little quirks to it, which can mean that they're both interesting to fly. But when you get up tiered, let's say into a 5.3 or even a 5.7, there is not really a lot you can do. I have a general playstyle when it comes to the majority of Spitfires, and it's climb to the bombers, take out the bombers, reset, climb to the fighters, take out the fighters, and if the fighters haven't climbed, or if they're already in that nest, then if you go after the bombers, you'll still have about 2,000 meters of out, then you can go over there and attack them. And that's pretty much how the game plan works. This doesn't always work, because some people stay high, and especially in the Mark 5C, you're not able to defensively fly. In the Mark 5B video that I did the other day, or a week ago, or whenever it was, one of the things that I showed in the replay section, which was the historical section, is I was fighting with 3 or 4 enemy fighters at the same time. Yes, one of them was an ME-410, but the rest were P-47s, BF-109s, and Focke-Wulfs. And I was able to outturn them for 5 to 10 minutes, keeping my energy. The Mark 5C is not able to do that, and that is its downfall. So what you have to do is you have to play it as a pseudo Tempest / Typhoon. And this doesn't work because you don't have the dive speed. This thing can dive around 730, 740, and that is just not quick enough to catch the best aircraft that are at this tier. Remember, at 4.7 for the Americans, you have the P-47N and the P-51D. These two aircraft massively outshine the Mark 5C in the dive department and also the energy department. Even though they're heavier, they have a much more beefier engine and also just better flight characteristics. So my opinion of this is its BR right now is too high. And also, because of where it is in the tree, it is the last of the 4 Mark 5 Spits in the list. Nobody's ever really going to play this thing. Like, nobody will have to play this thing. They'll just breeze past it and go on to rank 4. And that's a real shame, because, well, I personally like the Spitfires. So for me, I'll always play them. But the issue is, talking about, will people play this Spitfire? Well, the Mark 5B is already a stretch, being the second in the grid. Maybe people will get it, but I would still say get the Mark 9 first. But nobody is ever going to get the Mark 5C. In the first few days, I saw a few people running the Mark 5C, but since I've been actually spading it out over these few days, I haven't seen a single one. I've only seen me, and maybe one other person every blue moon. And I think that's because, well, first of all, it's in this grid system, second of all, nobody really cares about it, and third of all, it has too high of a BR. It needs a 4.3 BR. There is no reason for me to take this Spitfire over the F Mark 9 right now, and the F Mark 9 is at a lower BR than it. The only reason is for those extra 2 Hispanos, and if you're good at aiming, which eventually with the Mark 5C you will become, then you might as well just take the Mark 9. And it's kind of as simple as that. It's a real sad case for this machine. I don't think we're going to see a lot of it, and even though it is fun to fly, even though it has some going for it, you know, in the climb department, in the low speed turn department, in the gun department, it just won't be seen. And that's really sad, because, well, as a fan of Spitfires, I would like to see it be seen, if that makes sense. But hopefully, in the future, we won't get as many of these grid vehicles. So, or list vehicles, I think, is a better, apt way of putting it. Just because this is the 4th one in the list, and nobody's ever going to play it. So, hopefully, we see a few more in the future, and it gets its BR load to 4.3. I'm fine with it being the same BR as the Tropical, which is in, because the Tropical, it has slight advantages over the Mark 5C, and the Mark 5C has slight advantages over it. The Mark 5C is more maneuverable, the Trop doesn't try and kill itself after 5 minutes. The Mark 5C's engine will kill itself, just like the Mark 5B's one, after 5 minutes if you keep on wet, but dropping it to 100, sometimes 97, will get rid of that. But anyway, it's a sad tale, unfortunately, from me. Even though I have a good KD in it right now, it's not the Spitfire I would recommend. I would always recommend the F Mark 9 to people who want to fly a rank 3 Spitfire with a lower BR. And you should propel yourself to that Mark 9 by just getting the Mark 5B Trop and then just grinding out the Mark 9. But anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.